Hey, yeah. Good morning. It is Tuesday morning, as always, when you should be receiving this video announcement, or at least it's been posted at that time. Gosh, man, I guess we're up into week 13 of the course. I think the course runs. Let me make sure. I'll check. I think it's like around like a 16-week thing here, 17 weeks including the final. So you're in the home stretch. You've got about 3 weeks or about a month to go. I've noticed some of the work is, not the quality of the work hasn't fallen off, but the pace at which, I think folks are getting the work completed has slowed down, and that's okay. I realize that semesters, 16-week semesters can be it's longer than you think. It's a slog, and it's hard to stay motivated and stay on top of your work, and to continue to sort of meet deadlines. It's not the easiest thing in the world to continue to do that given outside circumstances in our lives. So if you've fallen behind just a bit, don't sweat it, but please put a plan in place to get caught back up as quick as possible. After we finish reading, for this week you'll need to read up until, I don't know, I think it's like page 225 or so in my version of Love Medicine, up to the chapter, the title chapter of the novel Love Medicine with Lipsha, his sort of chapter. So and then we'll finish the novel next week, and there'll be a response paper due on it, and then things slow up a little bit. We have one long poem like after next week, and then the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks of the course, at least the reading load falls off substantially, I would say. But you will have this next response paper after Love Medicine, and then you'll have a relatively straightforward final short essay. It's not. Don't worry about the short essay so much. That'll be due after the last week of class. So, what you should probably to get back to Love Medicine, I think it's always fun for me to sort of begin to read the discussions of this particular book. I know I talked about how much I love Fool's Crow, and there's a reason, but I also love this text by Louise Erdrich equally, I think, for what it does. And I think these are two books that are really interesting to sort of read together. Not only do I find the authors vastly different, I also find the tribal cultures to be quite a bit different. I find the settings of the two novels to be radically different. And I think what you can really get when we read these two books back to back, I think what I hope that you can sometimes understand, or at least think about the representations of the lives of the characters. And think about how the influences of time and settler colonialism and maybe culture, there's different sort of tribal settings, and so in some senses, maybe we should be wary of reading any Native American text as a representation of cultural purity, because they're simply not. They're nothing more than works of fiction by authors. But what they do, I think, is allow us to sort of get at sort of the aesthetics of Native life, and how people choose to sort of represent that life and represent the struggles of the characters. And I think that the struggles of the characters is what is unique. One of the very unique things about these two texts. When we read Fool's Crow, we see a culture that is deeply immersed, right? We see characters that are deeply immersed in a cultural setting which they know and they understand, and it's immediate, right? We see them right on that pivotal point to where radical change is about to come because of the materialist forces of the Napequans, and because of the material forces of settler colonialism. Their political economies are about to be disrupted. Their lives themselves are about to be disrupted. I mean, it's a horrific scene that we see with the Maraniss massacre at the end of Fool's Crow. But then we also see some level of hope. We see the people come back together and dance at the end of Fool's Crow. Very much in the same way that we'll be dancing at the powwow come April 23rd. So come on out if you can, or volunteer if you can for that. I'll put my plug in for their extra credit if you do sign up. So please consider doing so. Next. We see right on the pivot of that great change, but we still see things pretty much intact. When we read Love Medicine, we're at the opposite end of that spectrum. We see, in some ways, the lives of characters in these multiple narrative strands of the lives of characters working together to form a coherent narrative, and trying to put people's lives back together, lives that are in many ways deeply fractured, lives that are in many ways struggling under the sort of strains of settler colonialism, but also very much managing to survive within that system. And they manage to survive through a number of different means. One of the most is their ability to tell stories, and their ability to sort of maintain the narrative of these multiple families coming together and maintaining strength in who they are and maintaining survival into the future. I mean, it's no joke, I think. Sometimes it doesn't always work out, but sometimes it does. I think it's very important to sort of read. If you go back and look at the very beginning of Love Medicine, you'll see, I think it's very important to sort of read this story in Easter. The story begins in Easter as she sort of walks down the streets of Williston, North Dakota, right? That oil boom town, right? And it's on Easter Sunday that she sort of, June dies, right? June literally walks off into the cold and dies, right? Icy water, ice, snow, right? Pay attention to what I would suggest you do for this week, right? It's very important that she begins her backup. It's very important that she begins there on that Easter Sunday, and that it's the sacrifice it's her death that haunts this novel, but it's also her death that the characters have to somehow begin to sort of make sense of. That's the initial sort of inciting action that sort of sets the characters in motion, is the death of someone that was deeply loved by many people in the community, and it's the sense of this death that the family must sort of come to in order to move forward. And some people will manage to make sense of this death and compartmentalize their lives in such a way that they can continue to go on, and other characters will struggle greatly. But also pay attention to not only June's death, but also how that death brings people together, but also the expanse of history. Pay attention to when each of these chapters sort of start. They're pivotal, sometimes dates. 1934, let's say, with Nectar Cashpaw is the Indian Reorganization Act. 1957 is the time of Native termination, right? So those dates matter. Also, the roles that the characters play in the survival of the families, in order to sort of, we see a distinct shift between traditionalist people in the novel and those that have somewhat assimilated into or acculturated themselves into the settler colonial societies, right? Into the governmental structures of those settler colonial societies. We see a fictionalized version, I think, in some ways in Nectar Cashpaw of someone that Charles Eastman may have been proud of, right? Nectar, for all of his faults, for all of his meandering ways with his wife, for all of his troubles, he's also the one that negotiates and keeps the family, that keeps the community together, that keeps the tribal government going forward. And it's very important that Albertine sits there on the edge of this novel and begs her grandpa Cashpaw, her grandpa Nectar, to tell her, right, her uncle Nectar, to tell her about what life was like then. She's starving for that information, but that information is always already, it seems, in the lives of these characters, submerged under water, right? So this metaphor of water becomes extremely important in the novel. Pay attention to how metaphors work, to how the metaphor of water works, to how, we talked about early on in this semester about how important fishing is to the Ojibwe. So pay attention to how that metaphor of fishing and how traditionalism is always somehow submerged underneath the surface of something. And you understand how water sort of divides the earth in many ways, between a world below the water and a world above that water. This duality, I think, is very important in this novel, and how the characters manage that duality and the duality of their lives that are simultaneously searching and trying to find something to hold on to in their lives that ties them to their traditional understandings of themselves as Ojibwe, but also operating in a world of modernity. So this is a novel of great change, but it's also a novel of people sort of working simultaneously, working outward from the center of this community, but also being drawn back into the center of this community as the center of the tribe that holds them together. And one of the strongest bonds of that is family, as well as the relationships that they build amongst each other. I also think that this is deeply a novel about the roles of women and within the survivability of these tribal communities. And so you'll see the duality of the characters of Marie and Lulu. Lulu, I think, being one of my favorite characters of Native American literature of all times. But Marie also has, I also love Marie as well. And I think, it's important to see the role that these two women play in maintaining the survival of this tribal community. I've gone on quite a while. You're just going to read and do more discussion journals for this week. You'll have a response paper that'll be due sometime after week 14. So keep up with your reading, keep up with the good work. Also, I'm going to send out later today, it's really unfortunate, it just broke in the news today about, and I don't want to end this on too much of a sad note, but there was tragic conditions, I guess, in Northern Ontario, and I don't know the specific tribal group that's involved. It's a tribal community in Northern Ontario who've had some pretty severe rates of youth suicide in the past few days, like multiple mass attempts, right, at suicide. So I'll post the link, and I just want us to read it and know this, right? Because I think that it relates to this novel in some fairly profound ways, and that's that, after 524 years of settler colonialism, tragic events like this, and they never hurt any less, and it's a testament, I think, to tribal community survival that they work through this, but it's also a reminder of how difficult it is for tribal communities to survive, under these conditions. And so, it's always a good reminder, and I think it's important to remember this in terms of, as we read the lives of characters in this novel. I think in some ways this novel is trying to talk about that very tough lived reality that's tribal culture life, but also something that people it's just a beautiful testament, I think, to people's ability and testament to their survival. And so I'll post a link for people to read it. The story is breaking and it will be ongoing, but I think it's important to know that even though we read these works of fictions, there is a very real world outside these works of literature where the conditions in many tribal communities are such that it's a beautiful life, as David Troyer said early in the semester. It's a beautiful life, but it's also one that's filled at times with great tragedy. All right, so just stay strong, do your work, and finish the semester hard, and we will all get through this by the end, I promise. All right, thanks so much, and we'll talk next week. Yeah, Washita.